Would anyone be willing to just volunteer one thing that you're willing to share with us that you're thankful about in your personal life? Thank you. Family. All right. How about in your congregation, someone be willing to share? Fellowship. Fellowship from Bill, the man who made the coffee. Can you tell that that's central to his being? And then finally, someone, what you are thankful for in your community. Emergency services from the past EMT are currently working with fire trucks, ambulances, and other vehicles. Strong sense of ecumenism. Is that phenomenal? What a joy. I have to share just real quickly, yesterday I had one of my best and dearest friends. She was my boss for about 5 years in my previous career, who came down from New York to visit yesterday, and she's Jewish. But she went to a Catholic funeral a week ago. And we had many conversations yesterday, just trying to understand, because it's just not part of her being. And it was really a joy, such a joy to be able to challenge ourselves and question me, so I had to think about really what it was about, right? All right, thank you. So I'm going to ask you to keep those with you, but when we wrap up, when we take a quick break before lunch comes out, do you see back there? We've got personal thanks, community thanks, and church thanks. I am going to ask you to post them there, and maybe if you finish lunch in 30 minutes, you can go over and look at what everyone's thankful for. I just want us to get a sense of the great thankfulness we have, because that's part of our heart, right? That's part of why we do what we do and why we come together in this fellowship. So, let me tell you, in our synod, the reason that this thought of personal, congregational, and community is so important is in our synod, our thoughts on generosity are that we are an interconnected community of faith, living Christ-centered lives, celebrating God's grace, abundantly sharing our blessings and gifts. And as the title to my presentation says, because we know that with generous hearts and thankful giving, we get closer and discover the joy of Jesus Christ. That's not always easy. I think Candy talked a little bit about that, so we'll talk more in a moment. So I'd like you to briefly think a little bit about an early experience of being a steward. So that would be giving of your time, your talent, your treasures. Think about an early experience. From that experience, what do you recall? What do you remember? One of the things I want to reflect on is giving attitude. And I think we've heard already today that different people have different giving attitudes. And I appreciate these ways of understanding it, which is there are some people who give because they are so grateful. They are grateful for what an organization or the church has done for them. They are just grateful people. It is who they are. But there are also people who give because they're responsible. They believe that they have a responsibility to give. There are those people who give because they are truly self-sacrificing, right? They just are self-sacrificing. They give more. Sometimes maybe that means they risk a little for themselves, but it is who they are. And then there are those people, maybe we think that it's similar to grateful, but there are those people who just like to share. I think share is a little different. I think share maybe has a little personal piece of you like it because you get something back, right? There is certainly a sense of obligation. I see responsibility and obligation different. I think our historical, I'm going to say it to the room, and please don't take it as an insult, but many of our much, much older generation truly give because of an obligation. That obligation is oftentimes spiritual because of their sense of tithing, but there are others that give because they pretty much were told by someone in their family that this is what you do and you must. Little different than being responsible. I also believe, and I think I said that, obligation and proportionate, committed. I am going to stick with this organization. I feel committed to this organization, and that means I give. I also believe that there is a difference between being grateful and being genuine. Those people who give because they are genuine, give because they know that their heart is with God and their heart is with the people, and they just give because it is who they are. And then finally, I missed regular. I shouldn't have missed that one because those are the folks who come to your church who you love having in your church. But what? They give the $20 every week. It's just $20. It's never more than $20. It's rarely less than $20 unless they don't happen to have cash, and then they don't. It's that regular. It's kind of a sense of, it's a nice sense of commitment, but it's also something they don't think about. It's habit. And then there are those people which give because they're challenged. Isn't that what fundraising is all about, right? We've got a challenge grant going on. We've got a challenge for you. But that challenge can be a faith challenge for giving in our setting. So just wanted you to think about that. So you guys will not be surprised that at least I bring this up. We all are used to seeing this analogy of what do you see here is this scarcity or abundance, and I believe Candy even referenced it a little bit. But I want to bring this to a different thought. So if, of course, you see the glass half full, we say that you understand our God as a God of abundance. If you see the glass half empty, we tend to understand our God as a God of scarcity. I want to challenge you, though. Does it have to be half full or half empty? Or can we instead always think about how we can refill and replenish? Instead of seeing it as we can't, it's what would we need to do to make that happen? What is God's mission that we are seeking to make happen? How do we need to respond differently to make that happen? I just want to, obviously 2 Corinthians is kind of a foundation for me. So, obviously our stewardship is what we do and believe with what we've been entrusted to us. How we can make sure to refill and replenish, I think, is by knowing, and God is able to provide you with every blessing in abundance, so that by always having enough of everything, you may share abundantly in every good work. And we heard stories today of folks in their life experiences who didn't think they maybe had enough, but lived this, didn't they? Who maybe didn't fully understand what was being put in front of them, but lived it. But you lived it, and now there is that story, and that story is what's so important. So, when we think about thankful and generous stewardship recognizes the gifts and the blessings with which one has been entrusted. What are those gifts? Life, it's that family, it's friends, it's Christ, it's money, it's our culture. We can't forget that. Sometimes we want to change our culture, change our kind of what we come from, but it is who we are, at least on one level. Our talents, our time, certainly creation, the world, our environment. I think you named them all. So I am going to ask you to do another activity because that's just who I am. So I'd like you to just think and keep it to yourself for a moment. I want you to think in the last week, where did you see generosity? However you want to define generosity, okay? Where did you see it? I don't want to say that as a church we only want to focus on the positive, but my goal today, for today, was to lift up thankful, generous hearts. Because I worry that in this current time of congregations, we see numbers decreasing, dollars decreasing, that we live in a world of scarcity and worry. And I don't think it's easy as leaders to go in and try to talk to folks about being abundant and generous if you're just feeling downtrodden yourself. So please know that's my goal today. It's not just to talk about the good things, because I know there's tough stuff going on out in that world. But we have to remember that. So again, back to 2 Corinthians 8. We want you to know, brothers and sisters, about the grace of God, for during a severe ordeal of affliction, their abundant joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For as I can testify, they voluntarily gave according to their means, and even beyond their means, begging us earnestly for the privilege of sharing in this ministry to the saints. Now, as you excel in everything, and that's everything when you're generous, you excel in your faith, in your proclamation of word and speech, in your knowledge, in utmost eagerness, and in our love for you. So we want you to excel also in this generous undertaking. Obviously, it is a spiritual discipline to be generous. It says so right here, right? It says, as they were moving forward in creating this church of ours, that yes, there were times of affliction, and yes, they had to sacrifice, but it was a privilege. And it was a privilege because they knew they grew in their faith, their knowledge, in their love. So I am actually going to talk a little bit about motivations of generosity. We didn't talk, but we're sort of on the same theme, but a little bit different. I hope that's not a problem. So I want to frame it a little bit around, I think we all have really positive motivations. Not always positive, because as Candy talked about, it's easy to be motivated to gain something from it. But even when we're doing that, I hope that there's a good heart to it and a good purpose with it. But as we talk about generosity with our congregations and our friends and our fellow members, it is important to think a little bit about a couple of ways that people are motivated to give. Because if you are a person like me who is motivated by compassion, I am just a caring, loving, supporting, serving, giving, sharing, social worker person, right? It's who I am. And so we know many people serve God out of compassion, and these are people who do it because of their love of children, of family, of their community, their country, and God's mission. There are also those people who truly give out of community. It's their motivation. They give because it's about fellowship. It's about getting to hang out with Yvonne every week because her orange just brings me joy. Right? Right? Bill said it. That's the motivation to give, is it's that sense of community, of belonging, of fun. Right? And that's important because we as the church know that is that spirit of community that keeps us together. There also, though, as I talked about a little earlier, are those people who really are motivated by challenge. And it's because they want to achieve something. They want to know that we are going to create that new ministry program, that we are going to renovate the sanctuary, that we are going to build a new youth program. It's that achievement, right? Finally, there are two other motivations, and one is commitment, and I love commitment. God asks us to be committed to this ministry, right? It's dedication, it's faithfulness, it's obligation, it's vows. Committed to your spouse, to your... These people are motivated, obviously, out of loyalty to the church. Maybe the pastor, maybe the leader. Probably many cases, at least here in Delaware-Maryland, it's because it's the church their parents went to, their grandparents went to. Yeah. Many people, maybe not so much on the Eastern Shore, you get a lot of those folks who've moved in, but in other parts. And then finally, there is that person who is motivated by accountability. They're kind of logical. Sorry, I laughed too loud. They are information-oriented. They are the executives of organizations often. They are the black and white in a really good way. They are analytical. They love databases. They love for you to be able to speak to them about all of the outcomes. And the reason I wanted to challenge us on these different motivators was one, to chuckle and think about who we are. That certainly ties with where Candy was going. But it's more because as the leaders in generosity, if you speak to the person who gives out of compassion by giving them data, but if you talk to that accountant who is the financial chair about love and community and fellowship, they may not get it. Or they get it, but they don't feel it. They don't believe it. So like all things, we have to understand who we are, because you can tell your faith story best from who you are. I can't tell a faith story from the perspective of obligation. It's not who I am. But you also need to be able to speak to the person's belief systems if we really want to. And the reason I share that is we oftentimes doing stewardship do temple talks, right? Mm-hmm. And we get people like me up there all the time, the ones who are, yippee, we're pretty happy all the time. But you know, the folks that really are far more on the accountability side may not respond well to that. So if you're doing 3 temple talks, please think a little bit about making sure that those faith stories are true from the heart, that they speak to mission, but that also not every one of them is from the same style of giver. We want to touch more people, and that's the way to do it. So I will share real quickly, I'm just going to let you know that trends fall out there. Most people do not just give from one area, they give from 2, most often. But just to give you a sense, nationally, commitment is still 40% in the Lutheran Church. Not surprising. Compassion, though, is 23. Community is 16. Challenge is 11. And look, there's still almost 10% of those people who really do better, as we know, from that accountability. Then accountability is 10, like I said. And I think a building program really falls around both of these, because building usually has to do with how you can increase your capacity or connection or engagement, or those two go strong. Generational differences, I'm not going to go a ton into this, partly because I have knowledge, but it is not my expertise yet, and I just want to be honest about that. But we know that generationally, especially the younger generations, feel an important sense to be connected to what they give. They need to feel that they've made an impact. So, my good example is I was talking to a church yesterday who one of the council members, we were talking about doing a narrative budget. And a narrative budget means you take your line item budget. You still have a line item budget. You have to have that. But we think about where that spending for the pastor and for the building and for all the ministry falls within your mission. And it could be your mission of worship, youth, outreach, and service kind of a thing. And the person said, I don't get it. I don't get why we would do that. And that's because that person is an obligation person. They just give. And I don't mean that negatively. I mean, they give because they are committed and obligated to do that. And my response, I'll get to just a second. My response was, this is no different than the Juvenile Diabetes Association. And if I asked you to give so that they can have a CEO, I don't think you'd give. You give because they are funding research to help kids, like your neighbor across the street, to get the pumps so they can live an everyday life, right? We know, especially folks who are in their 40s and younger, really feel an important sense to know that there's mission and change. His study felt that we had 2 or 3, but I agree with you. There are also those of us, I tease, I'm sort of the jack of trade and master of none, so I fall under a number of those categories because I believe strongly, and I know we as a church believe strongly, Todd, is time, talents, devotion, meaning prayer, and money. And I ask that we ensure that we pray and think about those 4 questions that Candy asked us. And from there, you give what God is calling you to give. I'm going to move into some of those tips and tricks. And one of the things that I don't know that I listed here, but I do want to encourage you to think about is helping each other really, truly identify our talents. Too very oftentimes we have people do a time and talent, right? And we ask them, just check the ones you want to do. And yes, they have a talent for doing the altar guild, but they haven't ever tried something else and had an opportunity to realize that they would be an incredible Bible study leader. But no, that's always what Yvonne's done. That's not what I do. But looking for that and challenging and mentoring is so important. But I want us to think about how to encourage and excel, if you remember in 2 Corinthians 8 that I talked about. And this is how I'm asking you to think about taking this back to your congregation. And the very first one is we just have to remember to thank people. Thank them. I was at a congregation about 4 weeks ago talking about Forward in Faith, and I talked to Tormod afterwards, and just on Thursday, I guess, he looked at me and he said, I want you to know, one of my members, the number one thing he remembered is that you did not ask us, I did ask him to think about and pray about giving, but I mostly said, and I just thank you for the gifts that you do give to this church, to our greater church, and to the world. And the man said, I just remember she thanked me. I thought, okay. So that's important. Do that in authentic ways. Don't do it in a rote, traditional way. Do it to build relationship, though, if you can. And yes, letters can do that, but make them personal letters. You also want to do that in thinking about making one-on-one connections for thank you. I would encourage you to maybe even think about, is there a way during service or during a Bible study to just ask people to think about their personal thanks, their community thanks, and their congregational thanks, and post those on the wall of your church. I want to just point out number 2. So this is more for you before you're thinking about how to go out and encourage your congregation to be generous. David Kuntz suggests that you do something called still points. And what that means is in those unfulfilled moments of your life, that could be standing in front of the microwave, it could be sitting at a red light, it could be in line waiting to get through the Easy Pass, trying to go over the Bay Bridge. Oh wait, that's more than a still point. But those moments where the first thing you do is stop. First thing you do is stop. Then you breathe. And then you remember and you reflect on God and your thanks. I think this is incredible in this world of more, me, go, that we encourage ourselves regularly, multiple times in a day, to have a still point. I challenge you to think about maybe the prayer during that moment being a different one in the morning, a different one at night, one on, I want to pray on my gifts, and the second one on, I want to pray on my generosity. I think it's all about saying thanks, but I think it's about saying thanks not only in your volunteer. I think it's saying thanks when people give of their money, of their time, their talents. I think it's important to thank your paid staff. Your paid folks still need to know that they are cared for and appreciated. We all deserve thanks. So. The next one, and I've already said it, and I'm going to give you a couple of tools to leave with today that might help, but it's essential in stewardship that you please tell faith stories. And those faith stories cannot be something that you copied off the internet. For one thing, that's plagiarism. But they need to be from your heart. And when you're telling mission stories, it's important to remember that it needs to be my story. It's good if it connects to our mission story, and it must include God and Jesus Christ. I like to frame my mission stories in always ensuring also, because I am a talker, but boy, I struggle with prayer. So I love to force myself in a temple talk to have to wrap it up with prayer, because I'm trying to grow my gifts, right? In an area that kind of scares me. I'm pretty sure I'm always doing it wrong. But you know what? People tell me God doesn't care. I'm still working on it. I kind of have high expectations. So then let me move on to another, not that I need my book, but I also want us to think about regularly reminding folks ministry must not only supply our own needs, but also overflow to protect all God has created and given. So I mentioned that one of my roles is mission support. Normally when they think I'm coming in the door to talk about mission support, no one looks very happy. You know, they all want to know, why should we give to the synod? Why should we give to the church? And I get that, because it's hard to pay the bills here some days. I feel that pain. But I also know that when we give, abundance will come back. I also know that when we take care of others, they will come back and help to take care of us. And quite honestly, we are the greater church. When we are an ELCA member, we believe that we are the greater church. And we need to own that, and we need to live it. So just to remind folks of that. So one of the things that will be coming out in about the next month is the ELCA, and they're on the website, if you're a website person, is every year they create something called Stories of Faith in Action. And those are just like the stories you see in our Synod E letter, which I would also have you lift up. Those stories are not there just so you get to hear about how we did nice things with the LYO youth. It's not there just so you can hear how, Mark's church is getting to lead. It's there so you get a chance to know how people are being transformed. So tell those stories. The stories of faith and action are greater church stories, so it gives you a chance. So I just ask that you think about those. A perfect one right now, of course, is to share how we as the church and Lutheran Disaster Services is helping across all of those folks who were hurt, who have been and continue to be living through those hurricane issues. When you give mission support, it goes to serving every one of those kinds of programs. So the other thing that is big for me, and I think a little bit about it, can't remember what Candy said, but she said something, or maybe it was Pastor Eric, but that just made me say, oh, I love that, thinking about how changing up your service and your ministry is so important, changing it up a little bit. And one easy and important way that I think you can do that is by making offering just a little bit different. I know somebody was chatting, I think it was Flavia, Cliff Christopher, who is known for several of his stewardship books on Not Your Parents' Offering Plate and other things. Really, he's so phenomenal. He could just tell the story so great about, so it's offering time. Would the ushers please bring down the plates?
Easy now.
And the ushers are in their suits and they look so good and they're so darn serious. I mean, I appreciate that sense of tradition and that sense of serious obligation, but I'm scared of them, so I'm not sure I want to put anything on the plate, especially if I'm new. So one of the things I ask you to think about is how can you change up offering? Can you do a little different devotion once a month before asking them to bring down the plates? We always recommend that if you're going to do a stewardship table talk, don't do it at the beginning, don't do it at the end, the people who come late, the people who leave early. It has to be done in relation to offering. It must be done at the time of offering so that we connect that story with the gifts that we're giving. And do not be shy at the end of that temple talk to include in your prayer. And because of your gifts of time, talent, prayer, and treasure, we're able to do this mission at this church. Then hand out the plates. They need to know that that's not just putting your $20 in the plate because you've done that forever. It's because it's what we are and who we are. And if you change it up every once in a while, they go like this. Wow. If you have the ability to do a screen, have things during offering, scroll pictures of your ministry so they can look at those beautiful children's faces and that wonderful quilt that person made and this homeless project that you've done. It motivates them differently and it makes them think about it differently. That's that call to offering. The other recommendation that is really well talked about nowadays is to also make sure that you include in your prayers every week a Thanksgiving prayer that literally just says, and dear God, we thank you for the gifts of time, talent, and treasures that this congregation gives to lift up the good works that you allow us to do. And it's in your prayers, because we should be praying for all of us, right? That's a thanks as well as a prayer. Finally, I just want to also mention, just related to spiritual discipline, there's lots of ways to do faith formation, because prayer daily is an important part of generosity. It keeps us centered. Some of our churches are doing intergenerational work. Faith 5, I'm not actually going to share with you right now, but if you just look it up on the internet, Faith 5 is a way of every night doing a prayer about, talking about, starting with the scripture, talking about what went well, what didn't go well, praying for someone else, and then wrapping up. But it's just a great way to force you to think about what you're thankful for. And then I am real quickly going to ask Yvonne if you don't mind handing these out. And then Candy, do you mind handing these out? So I am going to give you 2 takeaways. And in this takeaway, there's 2 different focuses. One of them is a 51 ideas for year-round stewardship. Now, even though 51 matches with almost 42 weeks, it doesn't mean you have to do one every week. But they're just great ideas reminding you, some of which we've already talked about. Tell faith stories. Some of them are make sure that your stewardship campaign matches your mission. Some of them are have fun. Literally, that's one of the ideas. The other document is a 50 ways to improve your annual stewardship campaign. So it's much more related to just that annual period. You will find from me, and please know one of the other tips is I'm delighted to come out and chat with congregations, councils, or stewardship committees at any time. But I will tell you, I'm not a program girl. All right, and when I say that, I mean there are phenomenal programs out there. Consecration Sunday is a program. Keep It Simple is a program. There are a number of programs, and they're fantastic because they give you your bulletin inserts and your Bible study and your time frame. They are fantastic. But my heart tells me that stewardship should always and must always be tied to mission. So you can do a campaign, but just don't forget to also talk about your mission. Talk about how what is happening impacts the ministry and the mission that you're doing. So then in my sending, if you don't mind, I'm just going to be sappy. And as thankful and generous stewards of God's gifts to us, I ask that we strive to be sincere in our faith, thankful for our blessings, genuine in our response, and generous with our gifts. I think that makes a heart good. So before I finish up, on your table are cards. I am asking that you take at least 1 or 2 with you during lunch if you want to write it. They are just blank cards. And I am asking you to please write at least 1 thank you to someone who you appreciate. It can be in your family, in your congregation, in your community. I, of course, encourage you to make it someone in your congregation, but take 2 if you'd like. Because I just imagine getting a thank you note for no reason. How would that make you feel? So please, go out, be thankful, and thank others.